Welcome to Longevity Industries' presentation of the Destiny of Manufacturing podcast. I am your host, Dean Phillips, and I'm glad to have with me today Shamoon Siddiqui. He is an AI researcher over at Rowan University. Welcome, Shamoon. Great to have you here today, sir. I wanted to right away find out, what is your big key takeaway for 5 years from now? What do you see going on?
So I'm glad you asked that, and I think it's a very interesting time to answer that question. I think the future of work is about to shift pretty dramatically because of whatever's going on in the world with Corona, COVID, however it plays out. One thing is for sure is that we are able to continue to function and work in a society with less constraints of in office. Now, certain industries need physical presence, but I think the one thing that we're going to question is 40 hours really the standard work week, and does it need to be?
Yeah. Yep. And I think some people, it's how you break up that 40-hour work week too. I think it's not just, it's 4 hours here, it's 6 hours here, it's 2 hours there. I think that's the other part of it, is that we are capable of having a more flexible schedule.
Completely. And I think that, some industries you need that block of time, but a lot of industries, knowledge workers and things of that nature, they can, even if they need to work the 40 hours, like you said, they can split it up to be task-based. Because when it comes to work, a large part of what a lot of people do, and probably myself included, and probably you to some capacity, is waiting for somebody. So if you're on the clock in whatever capacity, you're waiting for an email, you're waiting for something. As a result, you need to sit at a desk for 8 hours a day. But if we can be a little bit flexible with that, I think that the next 5 years is really going to have some interesting conversations with regards to that.
Yeah,
software, automation tools has helped considerably in the past, 5 months, 6 months. Good or bad in the shortcomings of every technology, but a lot has happened to make us think differently about what work means.
So expand on that, if you wouldn't mind. When you say that software has helped us, tell me a little bit more about how you think it's been beneficial to us, and how it's illustrated that point that work week needs to be more task-based.
Yeah, so I think, for example, and this is just it's going to be the year of Zoom. Zoom, this conference calling software with video and screen sharing capabilities. If you look back even 5 years, it was a pretty specific feature to have. Maybe a big Fortune 500 would have it in their conference room for video conferencing. It was a thing in movies that was promised that's finally come true. In science fiction, very often things are promised that never actually happen. But Zoom has happened. It's suddenly normal for kids to be learning from teachers that they're not going to see. And what school stars are, for those that have, you're going to be learning from teachers that you've never seen, that you've never had experience with, potentially classmates that you've never physically been in the same room with. Mm-hmm. Work is going to have the same thing. You're suddenly in conference calls and meetings, and there are negatives to it, but this tool, this technology has enabled all of us to figure out a new way to work. Asynchronous work has become more common, like I think you were alluding to.
Yeah.
There's a whole brew of various tools for task tracking, communication in some form or the other, to keep up with all of that.
Yeah, and there's more collaborative softwares out there now, of everything from things like Teams to there's about 1,000 of them out there, really, of collaborative.
And we're going to see more.
Yeah, and more function. The good thing is that competitiveness of it has really, and Zoom really illustrates this, that a lot of other companies have had to step up their game to try and compete, because they really didn't put the effort into that meeting software, even if they had it.
And I think you're going to see within areas like manufacturing, where there was this traditional view of shutdown is very expensive and you have to ramp back up. But if you remember earlier on, Tesla they shut down, but then they started to ramp up their factories before maybe some people said it was safe or they were ready. But at the very least, they proved that you can turn on capacity almost as quickly as you can turn it off.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And
so I'm curious how that will play out when that becomes more common, right? This notion of you have the hardware, you have the physical equipment, you must be running it. We can think a little bit differently about that now.
Yeah, and a lot of that goes to OEE calculations and value added and how much that everything costs, because people look at it as a cost generator. How much does this machine cost when it's not running? And people look at it in those terms rather than it's just a tool to get you to your end goal. And that's a good point. So tell me.
I think that in the immediate short term, when this thing lockdown ends and we're back to normal, all the CFOs are going to look at all of the space that they've leased or purchased for their companies, and they're going to see it being not utilized at all from the top 10, top 50 companies.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to question, does all of that capital expense, all that CapEx, that really contributing much?
Right.
To what the bottom line is. And manufacturing is going to be similar, where up until now, everyone has assumed an idle machine is, like you said, a cost center. And it may other things that we can focus on to maybe increase output, right? Because there's always two sides. Generate revenue, reduce cost.
Right.
With this hyper intense focus on reducing costs, maybe we've not paid attention to increasing revenue or efficiency in some other way.
Mm-hmm. So tell us a little bit about your background. How did you get involved in AI and in technology?
Sure. So educationally, I have a bachelor's in computer engineering, a master's in computer engineering, an MBA, and now I am going for the PhD specifically in AI. I've been in technology, however broad that may be, for about 20 years now. I've developed software for small startups, had a few of my own, Fortune 100 companies. And the one thing that's been a common trend of mine is, it seems all fancy, but a lot of decisions that people make all the time are arbitrary cutoffs, right? There is a mathematically better cutoff for whatever the problem you're trying to solve is.
Right.
But we continue to put our own intuition into it, and we don't necessarily need to. And that's been something that's been driving me at many companies. And my first experience with what we would call AI is back in 2005. I founded a team to compete in the in the DARPA Grand Challenge while I was at NJIT. And I don't know if you remember, but 15 years ago, DARPA had announced the robot races in the desert.
Yeah.
So now we're talking about self-driving cars as if they're somewhat normal, but back then it was absurd.
Mm-hmm.
And it clicked back then that a lot of decisions we were making, and we didn't know very much. I was a 20-something kid running this team with zero experience. But a lot of decisions were just arbitrary cutoffs. Like if you see a rock turn 17 degrees, why? It just feels about right. Or we experimented a bit and that felt right.
Mm-hmm.
But now when you look at AI, a big part of it is trying to find what are those magic numbers, right? That's all machine learning is trying to do. You have some incredibly complex function and you just want to make it better in some way.
Right.
So right now I'm doing a lot of research, time series analysis, which broadly speaking, speech, language, other time series examples are things like the stock market, which we all know.
Right.
Does price of the stock at 3 p.m. is determined by the stock yesterday and other stocks? So it's hard, but that's where my interests lie currently.
Great. And you were a speaker at Project Voice, and you talked a lot about AI at that time. And for those that aren't aware of it, Project Voice is kind of a voice-first conference focused on utilizing tools that are voice-first along with the associated technologies that go along with it. And at that conference, you were speaking on different complications that also go along with that. What are some of the challenges that we have with AI as we move forward?
Sure. So one of the examples that I brought up during my talk, and this is a borrowed example from Gary Marcus and others, you can ask your Siri or your Google Assistant or Alexa almost anything, right? So what's the capital of Zimbabwe? It'll tell you in 1 second. Where's the closest Carvel ice cream shop? Easy. But if you give it something that's even remotely what we call out of distribution, meaning something that hasn't been talked about or asked, it has a problem. And the classic example is find me a fast food restaurant that's not McDonald's. Right? Say that to a child, they'll tell you Burger King, Wendy's, they'll have a whole list of restaurants. Siri and Google and all the assistants, you don't know what that means. There's no restaurant. And it's not even a class of restaurants that are not McDonald's.
Right. Yeah.
So a lot of work has been done to get us to the point where you can speak it. And even that's a pretty big accomplishment. But there's a lot more to do in getting it to actually understand. Because no matter what you do, no matter how much you train it, there'll be that one person that comes up with one request that it's just never had.
Right.
And this, in essence, is one of the problems of AI. We keep moving that goalpost as soon as we hit it.
Yeah, our expectation level has gone up dramatically. I think watching my parents work one of the tools from like an Amazon show or something like that, watching them ask a question, and since they've never worked with the technology, they don't know how to phrase a question. It's very much like Simon Says. You have to say Simon Says first. So you have to say Google, or you have to say whatever the trigger word is to get it to wake up and pay attention first, then something else. And to watch people that have had no experience with that really is an interesting exercise because they
shows you how much farther we have to go.
Yes. And it also illustrates the point that it isn't just that we're teaching the device, it's that the device is teaching us what words it needs to hear and in what order in order for it to work.
And how to phrase the question.
Yes.
There's one other problem, and Google's gotten pretty good about this, is context. If I'm talking about fast food restaurants, my next query can't be, oh, actually not that one.
Right.
To give context, right?
Yes. It's funny you say that because that's exactly what they were doing when they're talking to it. They're said, dial this phone number, 555-621. No, not 621, 63. I said, you can't say that and expect it to understand what you want it to do if you don't say it.
But their expectation is their expectation is valid. It should be able to,
right?
Because a 4-year-old can do that.
Yeah, yeah. And it's interesting though how that works. Now, can you tell us a little bit about some of the advances? Let's look 5 years down the road of where we see someone like the computer science, the AI, machine learning. Where do you see some of this going?
So I think the most interesting stuff is going to be in language for sure. OpenAI, which is a top AI research firm, released a model called GPT-3 recently, I want to say 2 months ago. And it's pretty incredible, not because it generates language that's compelling, that they did a year ago, but because you can give it a handful of examples of what you're looking for and it can figure it out. Meaning you can train it almost to say, joke, why did the chicken cross the road? Punchline, to get to the other side. Joke, where does Santa Claus go swimming? Answer, the North Pole. Joke, and then it will come up with a joke and an answer based on 2 or 3 examples. There's a lot of promise there because, vision, I'm not going to call it a solved problem, but we've done a lot with vision. We're pretty good at vision. Mm-hmm. We can identify all sorts of things. We have classification algorithms that are great, and Facebook is awesome at tagging you and your friends. The language is still a lot left. So in 5 years, I think we're going to see some more convergence towards a better understanding of language from a machine's perspective.
Right.
The fact that we're able to generate language now is pretty awesome. What's next, I think, will be even more compelling because you're going to see an explosion in content creation. Right? So Instagram became a big deal because they allowed you and me and not professional photographers to take really good photos.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened? We as a species have created millions and billions of photos all of a sudden.
Right.
I don't have the stats offhand, but I'm sure it's something like in the past 2 years, we've created more photos than all of humanity before.
Yeah. Whether we wanted to or not.
Same with text. Yeah, exactly. Whether it's a good thing or not, that's a whole separate debate. But with the written word, we're going to see a lot more of the same. Last I checked, there's something on the order of 10,000 new blogs being created. Not posts, but people saying, I'm going to make a blog per day. You know, if a handful of them keep somewhat regularity, we're going to see this massive explosion in content creation. And now with AI, that can be aided.
Right.
Right. So like Gmail's got the Spark Compose feature with auto-complete some suggestions. That's going to be huge. And then people have the concerns of fake news and Russian bots and this and that, and that's all valid. But I'm curious to see how we solve that.
Yeah. Yeah. In the world of computing, where does as far as priorities go, where do you see things like mapping residing? Because we have a lot of different softwares that do similar things, but they can't collaborate together. Where do you see that in the priority of some of these companies to create solutions for it? Because certainly on the machining side and in the manufacturing world, we have a lot of machines generating information, and there's protocols for how those communicate. But then you get into the back end side of things like SAP, which keeps track of all the things that are going on in a building. Getting that information from one point to the other, there's this huge gap in there. And I think it's true in all softwares, because if you look at things like Salesforce and companies like that generate and store information about contacts, getting it into other softwares seems to be still an area that we struggle with. Where do you see that?
I think that's not going to go away.
Okay.
As much as we want interoperability, it takes a long time for that to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And there needs to be a compelling need. Any company that's got a decent moat doesn't want to play with others.
Right.
For a while, and actually up until pretty recently, everyone scrambled as to how do I make this a PDF, right? Which is like a standard format that everybody uses for everything. I remember, even 10 years ago, it was you have to get some weird other software from somewhere, or a plugin for Microsoft Word, or a weird printer app. It wasn't as easy.
Right.
And that's a PDF, which just everybody uses all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And for a while, Microsoft was the only company that would read the doc format. So you needed Word to read a doc file. And then it slowly opened up. And those are huge, right? Everyone uses those, and it still took a while. So when we get to these more minute use cases of some specific machining tool or, robot that does some manufacturing, they don't have a very strong incentive to play with others.
Right. Right. And that's true. And I've always said to companies that the drivers will be the big boys, companies like SAP, who has billions of dollars and is a $1 billion industry around it. Whatever they dictate is where it's going to go, because it's like the tail wagging the dog. If you think you're on the other end, you're going to be able to standardize on things. They're going to dictate the standards because they have such a huge base of customers and things like that. Same thing with softwares, seem to be the same way as that. To get small players to dictate, it really takes a consensus in getting the big people to the table.
The other option is we just have more deployments of these sorts of machines, right? So for a while, it felt like 3D printing was going to be in every house.
Mm-hmm.
That hasn't quite panned out that way yet, but if something like that begins to really be everywhere, there are, for example, standard formats for 3D printers. The problem is, I said standard format. plural. So even there's different approaches that people are doing in different proprietary formats. So if some of these other tools become more consumer use, then we have some shot of standardization. But as long as it stays in the business sphere only, you need to really, really push to get it to be interoperable or standardized or not proprietary.
Right. What are some of the other machine learning challenges that we have coming up that we're going to need to get out in front of as we try to look 5 years down the road that we need to look at and solve before we can get to our end goal of machines doing everything and us sitting back and watching?
That's actually two separate questions, and I'd like to address actually the second part as well. But for the first part, I think one significant thing is going to be bias. A machine learning algorithm is only as good as the data it was trained on. Mm-hmm. So, for example, if we look at text data, at least in the English-speaking Western world, most text data, and I'm using this broadly, so forgive me if I'm not accurate, was generated by sort of standard straight white males, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to reflect a lot of the viewpoints from that perspective. And this is seen because these various language models, for example, start to get pretty racist pretty quick if you start to use them.
Mm-hmm.
Every few months, there's some new article about how Amazon's facial recognition system discriminates against dark-skinned faces, or Google discriminates against women. Why? Because the training data was predominantly straight white males.
Right.
And things of that nature. So that's going to be pretty hard to overcome, because although there's ways to try to balance that out, you can try to give more pictures of minorities and all that, but that's another challenge because the U.S., for example, you don't want to overtrain with, for example, I'm Pakistani, so I'm brown skinned. You don't want to overtrain with people with my skin pigment because that's not representative of the United States.
Right.
So it's tricky because you don't want to just go the other way completely as well.
Right.
So I think that's going to be a big problem for the next 5 years because we just don't have the data in a balanced way for two large domains, images and text.
Right. And I think in general, we look at that as it's a problem when we look at things to believe that it's some company is worldwide. It really is very segmented to the U.S. model. Unfortunately, but it just is. It's just the cards.
Yeah. If there's some company that has, predominantly darker skinned or different facial feature people and using U.S. trained models, it's not going to quite work out for them.
Right.
Now, the second question, and this kind of circles back to the first thing, when can we all just sit back, relax, and think, well, machines do the work? Right? Automation was supposed to fix all that.
Right.
As far as when can we sit back? So Henry Ford told us, great, we're going to have this awesome automation. And all those industrial pioneers, their whole pitch to us was with automation, we can all eventually sit back, work less, get more stuff. And yet we still work 40 hours a week today. The same thing that we did in 1864, 1938, we're still working 40 hours a week.
Right.
I don't think that we will ever get to a point where we can all just sit back and do nothing. Partially driven by because some of us don't want to.
Mm-hmm.
And partially, I don't want to get all tinfoil hat on the conspiracy theory realm, but there's a whole system at play that doesn't really encourage that.
Right.
Right. The 40-hour work week is the classic example. It doesn't matter if you have 40 hours of work to do. You're paid for 40 hours of work. You're going to sit here for 40 hours a week. It doesn't matter if you're more efficient at your job.
Well, and I think
because some CFO is spending $2,000 per month on your your square footage of real estate.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think some of that is encourages the entrepreneurial spirit and actually a somewhat of an attitude towards the workforce of saying everybody's independent. Everybody, even though you work for this company, you're independent and you're project based. So if your project is done, then you're done. You don't have to sit around here. And as you said, yeah,
learn a language. If you have some off time, learn productively.
Mm-hmm. And that's it, is encouraging other things in how you're going to advance. And you also have to have a system built into your HR to accomplish that by saying, okay, if you learn another language, you're going to move to this tier, and we have some road for you to go down, not just saying, okay, you can go do anything you want, but you're still going to be stuck at this position. You have to have an avenue for those workers who want advancement, who want to do more, to accomplish that. And I think if you have
and right now the standard model is any training that you're going to do for a job is on your time. The company may pay for it, but it's on your time, right? Because the thinking is, if you're working for big company X, you're still working 40 hours a week, 9 to 5 or 8 to 5 plus lunch, or 8 to 6 or whatever it is. And I've been really trying to think, how can that go away, right? If we do have fantastic AI, incredible mechanization, we have all of that. We all like to think, okay, great, I'm going to go be a painter. I'm going to go travel the world, because money won't really be a huge issue, because we're just producing more than we need as a society or as a world. But that's kind of the case today, right? Food has never been cheaper.
Right.
Some things are skyrocketing in price, like college education. And of course, now it's not enough to have the iPhone 7. You need the iPhone 10 or 11 or whatever it is.
Yep.
So that's part of it as well. But I don't see a way out of all of us having to work 40 hours a week.
Right. Well, it's a challenge for us to solve all of those things with AI. I think it's a little bit audacious to try and feel that's going to solve
Absolutely,
everything.
Yeah. Yeah, because the assembly line didn't solve it, right? And then after that, steam power didn't solve it. So no matter what technology is on the horizon, it doesn't manage to solve it.
Right. What are some technologies you're excited about here over the next 5 years?
So I think the Internet of Things, as it's been referred to,
mm-hmm.
I'm very curious to see how that goes, because 5G or whatever it's eventually going to transform into, being able to collect, send data on every small thing with all of these machine learning AI models, I'm really excited to see what that does for us.
Yeah.
Is there some hidden data in your sneakers that could really improve your life somehow? I don't know. Up until now, we've never had the ability to try.
Sure. That's exactly right. We haven't had the data points that we have and are continuing to grow beyond belief. I mean, even in the smart homes, the data points that we're gathering are phenomenal. Well,
yeah, I have what's called a Sense. It's a unit you clamp onto your circuit breaker,
mm-hmm.
and it measures your electric usage, and it attempts to figure out which devices are using electricity when. It's remarkable. It's not, very complicated, but it lets me know.
Yep.
Wow, we use the stove or the dishwasher a lot more than we thought we did. And maybe we're okay with that, but maybe we're not. And now we have the data to make the decision.
Yeah. Yep. Shamoon, thank you so much, sir. It's been great to have you here today, and I know you've got a hard stop, so thank you for taking time out of your busy day to be here.
Thanks so much, Dean.
Again, this has been Longevity Industries' presentation of the Destiny of Manufacturing.